All right, we want to call this January 28th meeting of the Clayton Planning Board to order. And let's start tonight. Before we get started, let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, good evening. Glad to have everybody here tonight. And we have some new board members. Brand new year, so we've got some new board members that we need to have stand up and say their pledge. I'm going to turn it over to Conrad.
Thank you, Vice Chair Dupree. We got our town clerk, Heidi Hahn. She's going to do the swearing in of our new planning board members this evening. Solemnly swear that I will support all of the United States and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of my office.
Okay, Mr. McKerney? You'll repeat after me.
Sure.
I, Tom McKerney,
I, Tom McKerney,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and maintain the Constitution
that I will support and maintain the Constitution
and laws of the United
and
States
laws of the United States
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
not inconsistent therewith,
not inconsistent therewith,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
of my office
of my office
as a planning board member,
as a planning board member,
so help me God.
so help me God.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Deborah Hooker? I, Deborah Hooker,
I, Deborah Hooker,
do solemnly affirm
do solemnly affirm
that I will support and maintain the Constitution
that I will support and maintain the Constitution
and laws of the United States
and the laws of the United States
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
not inconsistent therewith,
not inconsistent therewith,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
and I will faithfully discharge the duties
of my office as a planning board member.
of my office as a planning board member.
Thank you.
Great.
You can take a seat. And Mark Powell? I, Mark Hall,
I, Mark Hall,
do solemnly affirm
do solemnly affirm
that I will support and maintain the Constitution
that I will support and maintain the Constitution
and the laws of the United States
and the laws of the United States
and the Constitution and the laws of North Carolina,
and the Constitution and the laws of North Carolina,
not inconsistent therewith,
not inconsistent therewith,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
of my office as a planning board member.
of my office as a planning board member.
Thank you. Okay, and we'll have a seat.
Does Ronald need to do it? Okay, let's do it now.
Yeah, come on. Come on.
You got to come back. We got
Whatever you say, Chip.
we got to swear you in again. I'm not sure about you. Make sure you're official before we vote on anything.
want to swear or affirm? Swear. Confirm. Affirm or swear? You want to use the Bible?
Here.
Okay. All right. Cover me. Yeah. That's okay. I, Ronald Williams,
I, Ronald Williams,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support and maintain the Constitution
that I will support and maintain the Constitution
and laws of the United States
and laws of the United States
and the Constitution and laws of North Carolina,
and the Constitution and the laws of North Carolina,
not inconsistent therewith,
not inconsistent with
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
and I will faithfully discharge the duties
of my office as a planning board member,
as the office of a planning board member.
so help me God.
So help me God.
Thank you. All right, I'll get you.
Okay.
Well, we want to welcome each of the new members and the returning members. We're certainly glad to have you here. And Conrad, you want to do a roll call?
Thank you, Chair Dupree. We'll go ahead and begin a roll call. And just as a matter of business, the button that has a little person to speaking, if you are responding or wanting to speak, make sure to turn it on. And if you don't want to be heard, just a quick reminder. So I'll go ahead and begin the roll call. Chair Dupree.
Here.
Board Member Williams. Here. Board Member Applewhite. Here. Board Member Gleason.
Here.
Board Member Saraski. Here. Board Member Bland.
Here.
Board Member Carter.
Here.
Board Member Hooker.
Here.
Board Member Hall. Here. Board Member Spence. And Board Member McKerney. All members are, except for Mr. Spencer, an account. We do have a quorum.
All right. Thank you, Conrad. Appreciate that. Item 2 on the agenda is adjustment of the agenda. Are there any adjustments tonight?
No adjustments, sir.
All right. Let's move on to item 3, the approval of the minutes. Has everyone had an opportunity to read the minutes from the December 17th meeting? I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'll move to approve the December 17th, 2024 Planning Board meeting minutes.
All right. We have a motion from Board Member Applewhite.
Second.
Have a second from Board Member Williams. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All right, that is passed. And I don't believe we have any public meetings this evening for item 4, so it's going to be a nice, smooth night. Smooth sailing. We're going to sail right on to item number 5 on the agenda, which is new business. This is training session for the Town of Clayton Board members and Chad Meadows with Code Right Planners, who's worked with us now for the last couple of years, is going to be here to do some trainings. Welcome, Mr. Meadows.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Dupree, board members. I'm Chad Meadows. It is so nice to be with you guys this evening. We're going to spend about an hour 10, talking about planning and how to be a planning board member and some of the other exciting things that are going on here in Clayton. So I recognize many of you. It was my pleasure to work with the town and many of you in the development of your new Unified Development Ordinance, which hopefully is serving you well, and that we are continuing to modify and improve as we move along. So I'm going to go ahead and start my slides, and we can go from there. Right. Fantastic. Back. Y'all have the nicest clicker ever. So just in case you're wondering, your clicker is wonderful. So Conrad asked me to come and do some training with you guys for a couple of reasons. One of which is the fact that there are 4 or 5 new members in tow tonight. So that is fantastic. The timing is perfect. Also, it's always good to kind of be up to speed with where we are with development regulations and so forth. I do not have a big long slide introducing me. For those of you who don't know me, I live in Durham. I was born in North Carolina and grew up here. I've been a planner for 32 years, both public side and private side. I've been drafting codes for local governments and doing comprehensive planning for local government clients for the last 20 years. And I formed CodeWrite Planners in Durham about 10 years ago. So I've been at this for a while. As I mentioned before, I'm the primary author of your Unified Development Ordinance, and chances are pretty good that you've been through, or live in a community that has a CodeWrite code or a set of CodeWrite provisions, no matter where you go in the state. This ordinance was our 35th development ordinance here in North Carolina. So we've been doing this for a while. The other thing that I'll mention is that I serve as the Board of Adjustment Chair where I live for Durham. So I know just what it's like to sit up there at the dais. In fact, we had our 6-hour meeting earlier today. So we had 6 cases, and we meet monthly just like you, and we have people come before us with applications, and we have to, discuss, debate, deliberate, and help people. So absolutely understand, what's involved in this task and this effort. And I'll just say thank you for your time and your attention and your appreciation for doing this work. We as a society need more people who are willing to get involved and participate and help out. And so I thank you because I know just what it's like. And I get to hear my spouse say, again. So I'm with you. All right, let's go ahead and get started. We have about 5 things we're going to talk about today. The first thing I'll preface this whole conversation with is smooth sailing. We're going to stay here for about an hour, hour 15. I doubt, seriously, we'll get all the way to hypotheticals. And that's okay. And the reason why that's okay is that maybe we can use this as an opportunity for me to come back in a few months when you've got a light agenda night and you've got new questions that have come to mind, especially for you new folks as you're going through this. This is a great opportunity for you over the next few months. Just keep a short list of things you'd like to hear more about or questions why we do this, that, or the other. And I can come back in a few months when it's a good time for you guys, and we can talk about some of these hypothetical cases, because I think that would be a lot of fun. It's much more interesting than the dry, boring training stuff that we have to deal with. It's much more entertaining to talk about potential cases or how we might conduct a mock hearing, etc. So we can cover that in the future. I do want to talk about planning generally, the general statutes, the Planning Board and the Unified Development Ordinance here in Clayton, and talk a little bit about the public meeting process. If you have any questions, you do not need to stand on ceremony. Be sure to push your little yellow button, or little green button, don't forget the person, so that it's recorded. But feel free to stop me with a question or a comment at any time. Okay? Any questions so far? Okay. Here we go. Let's talk about planning. This presentation is general in nature because I don't have any idea about the scope and breadth of y'all's training and your expertise and what you do in your daily lives. So we'll kind of start everybody at ground zero here, which is what is planning, right? The act of deciding how to do something. We do planning, land use planning, here in Clayton to identify a desired future state, which is, what we'd like the community to look like in 2040 right now. That's our desired target date, and to figure out what actions we need to take in order to reach that desired future state at the time that we specify. So that's what planning is. Why do we do it? Obviously, we do this because we want to make our communities better. That's why people generally are drawn to Planning Board or Board of Adjustment Service. They're interested in where they live, and they want to make it a better place to live. So we're promoting desirable outcomes. Ensuring efficient use of resources is another reason why we plan. You've got a finite budget. You've got a finite set of resources. You've got a set of conditions within which that you have to operate that are limited. And we plan so that we can make efficient use of what we have. If you watch TV or listen to the radio or pick up your phone, then you know what's going on with the climate on our planet. And it's not very happy news, unfortunately. Also, not very happy is the fact that it's going to get worse. And local governments, planning boards, are going to be tasked with figuring out how do we operate in the new normal, whatever that might be, whether that's more rain, more fire, more hurricanes, what have you, more scarcity of resources, et cetera. So reducing risk, managing hazards, important stuff. But it's not all gloom and doom, right? Quality of life. Everybody lives here in Clayton because it's a beautiful place to be, right? Housing is fairly affordable for the Triangle region. It's certainly a lovely community, fantastic small town atmosphere, lots of opportunities to do things, very convenient to other places, and frankly, it's just a nice place to be. So making sure that we're protecting that, enhancing that. Another reason why we do this, property values. You will hear, if you haven't already, those of you who are on the planning board know, but those of you who are new will hear. One of the major reasons why people come before you is that they make investment in land, okay? That they are trying to sell their land, develop their land, undertake some sort of project for some reason, okay? And protection of property values is a very important part of your responsibility, okay? Because if you have no development, you have no planning board, okay? Reducing disparities. We as a society could really get better at this. Over time, for whatever reason, disparity has crept into our institutions. It's crept into how we administer our development regulations. And we should always be looking for ways to minimize that, to reduce that, to equalize, to level the playing field, despite maybe where the federal government is on that topic. Locally in Clayton, reduction of disparities is an important part of the work that you guys do, okay? And then finally, just promoting a sense of community, which obviously you guys understand because you're sitting in this room right now. That's why we plan. Your comprehensive plan, Think Clayton 2045 Comprehensive Growth Plan. If you have not read this document, go get it, read it. You guys are the keepers of it. This planning board is the body who is responsible for it, for its care, for its feeding, for its update. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. But this is the physical embodiment of the planning actions that are undertaken by Clayton. It describes that consensed upon future, the vision for the community. It identifies the goals that are shared from the people who live here and the objectives that are necessary in order to reach the vision, okay? It also prioritizes the actions that the town wishes to take in order to achieve the goals that it identifies, all right? So that's a quick list of what your comprehensive plan is and what it does. But let's talk about the good stuff, okay? Because you guys, as the planning board, are a body who cares and feeds for the comprehensive plan. You are also charged with review and recommendation on a variety of land use development applications, land use decisions being made by the town, okay? And this comprehensive plan gives you the legal foundation that you need to have land use regulation in the first place. In North Carolina, local governments who wish to have zoning authority must have a comprehensive plan, okay? So zoning must be done in accordance with a lawfully adopted comprehensive plan. That is the law of the land, and it is fairly new law. Only since 2019 has that kind of provision been on the books here for local governments in North Carolina, all right? Now, having said that, while you're required to have a plan, one of the things that you'll soon understand if you don't already is that here in North Carolina, you have to have a plan, but you don't have to follow it. It is advisory in nature. And that will undoubtedly lead to some frustration from time to time for you as you move through your role as a planning board member. But Believe me when I say that the fact that you have to have a plan in the first place is a step forward for North Carolina. There are numerous other local governments in other states who are also required to have comprehensive plans. So you're not alone. North Carolina is just a little bit late to the party in terms of the requirement to have a comprehensive plan. Now, in addition to the legal foundation, remember, North Carolina requires you to have a plan in order to zone. It also guides your day-to-day land use decision-making, whether that's a rezoning application, whether that's a text amendment application, of which you guys consider. Maybe it's a street closing, et cetera. Maybe it's a capital improvement expenditure. The comprehensive plan guides your decision-making process, your recommendation. It's the outward expression of your community's aspirations, particularly as a function of economic development. People who want to come to invest in Clayton pick up your comprehensive plan more so than they do your development regulations in order to understand what is the climate here in Clayton, what is the likelihood that the land use investment that I make in Clayton is going to reap profit for me. Because if I can't make a profit in Clayton, I'm not coming to Clayton. Okay, I'm going to go somewhere else. And that's the reality for outside investors in the community. So you, Clayton, uses your comprehensive plan as the expression, the outward expression of what you're about and why this is a good place to make investment. It also includes a schedule, a desired timeframe for action, right? So your comprehensive plan includes an implementation schedule for all those policies and goals and objectives that are embedded in the plan. There are timelines associated with that. Who's making what decision? Who's taking what action? And by when? Okay, so it's a roadmap. It's a shopping list. It's a set of directions for how to render the future Clayton that your residents have agreed this is what we're looking for, okay? So that's enough on that stuff. I feel like we've covered that. Any questions on the comprehensive plan, why we have it, what's in it, and what you're supposed to use it for? Okay. As I said before, you guys are charged, not by Clayton, but by the state of North Carolina as the body who is responsible for initiating, overseeing, and maintaining the comprehensive plan, which Clayton must have because Clayton has zoning authority. So you have a very, very important role for land use planning and the ability to, grow, not grow, whatever, here in Clayton, all right? So you guys are important people. That's the first introduction to sort of planning and planning boards generally. Let's talk about the general statutes. Does everybody know what the general statutes are? Have you ever heard of such a thing? Yes, some head nods. Good. The general statutes are the set of laws that govern all local governments in the state of North Carolina. They govern the state government. They also control local governments. And it's a big book, really, really big. There's one chapter in the general statutes that is of specific import to you as a planning board, and that chapter is 160D, 160D. That is something that you should write down. I very much encourage you to go to the North Carolina Legislature's webpage, search out the general statutes, select Chapter 160D, you should see the link on your screen, and download that PDF and keep it handy because you will use it and refer to it from time to time. There are at least 3 sections inside Chapter 160D that have direct relevance to you and how you make decisions, okay? And the first of those is Section 301, Planning Boards. How you're authorized, et cetera. We'll go over this more in a minute. Plans and plan making generally in North Carolina. What are the expectations? What are the rules of the road? And then finally, 160D 604, how you guys operate as a body. Okay, so the things that you review and your responsibilities under the general statutes. Okay? Like providing comments on rezoning cases. All right, so those are the 3 main sections in 160D. If you can't sleep one night, drag it out. It'll put you right under, believe me. more so than the Clayton UDO. All right. I mentioned 160D Section 301 planning boards. Okay, so these are the rules in the state that establish the ability of local governments to have planning boards and how they have to be comprised. You have to have at least 3 members. There are 7 potential duties for a planning board. Your duties are handed to you by the elected officials. They are the body that decides what are the functions that you're going to perform. You could perform under state law any of the 7 that are listed on this screen. And in fact, you do perform most, if not all of these already. We've talked about your responsibility with the comprehensive plan, that you are the keepers of that, and all of the research and data work that goes along with that. Now, you have a staff whose job it is to prepare that research, to assemble that data, to help you interpret what it means, and assist you in making revisions to the comprehensive plan based on that data and analysis. But you guys are the body that are responsible for that. You're also responsible to facilitate and coordinate public engagement in the comprehensive planning process. One of the things that's really, really important, and I know that you guys know this, is the participation of the people that you govern, that you work with. The people who live here, the people who own land here, need to be involved in the process of comprehensive planning. And you guys are the body who's responsible for encouraging that, promoting that. Developing recommendations for policies to carry out the plan. How do we achieve the goal in the 2045 Clayton Comprehensive Plan? How do we do that? Well, guess who gets to decide? You guys do. You're going to make the recommendations to the elected officials about how we achieve the goals in the comprehensive plan. You guys have some day-to-day, workaday things that you've got to do that you're expected to provide recommendations on. Text amendments to the zoning text, map amendments to the zoning map. You have a direct responsibility to provide recommendations to the elected officials for those kinds of applications. We'll talk more about them in a minute. That is your bread and butter role. In addition to keeping the plan, making those recommendations on things that might affect or change the plan, like text amendments, map amendments. That's y'all's wheelhouse, okay? In addition, handling any functions handed to you by your elected officials that they may hand to you under state law, and which they've done. So there's a handful of other things that you do that we'll talk about in a moment, like street renaming. Street closure and street renaming are one of the application types that you guys are involved with, and we'll talk about that in a moment. We won't talk about providing recommendations for review of quasi-judicial decisions. That's probably a conversation for another day. We can talk about that the next time I'm in town if you want to. But these are your basic 7 range of things that you do. The elected officials decide exactly which ones you do. They're based on what's in the statutes. This is what the state of North Carolina allows the elected officials to delegate to you, and they choose which ones that you follow. Okay. Section 501 is the plans section. So it clarifies a few things. One, local governments have to have a comprehensive plan in order to have zoning. We've mentioned that. Okay, you want to have a zoning map, you want to have zoning regulations, it's got to be done in concert with a legally established, adopted comprehensive plan. This section sets out the intent for comprehensive plans. I'm not going to tell you what that is. I expect you to go and read it so that you're familiar with those provisions. It also identifies 10 recommended elements that every good comprehensive plan should have. They're not mandatory, they're recommended. Your plan addresses all of these. Future amendments to your plan need to continue to address these, and it's y'all's responsibility to make sure that those amendments do that. It requires comprehensive plans to be adopted, like zoning changes. Okay, so when Clayton, the 2045 growth plan was brought forward, it had to be adopted by the elected officials, following the same process that you guys follow for map amendments, for text amendments. That had to be undertaken and executed by the elected officials based on, you guessed it, a recommendation from you. Okay? Section 501 of the statutes also requires that the comprehensive plan be considered in any zoning amendments, whether that's a text amendment or a map amendment. Okay, so like I said before, you got to have a comp plan to do zoning. You also have to consider the comp plan when you're making a decision that rises to the level of a rezoning, whether that's a map change or a text change. Okay, so everybody understand that the UDO is a set of text provisions, but that there's also a zoning map that's associated with it. So there's text and there's a map. Okay, so those two things, sometimes people get confused. Those two things live together, and they are your Unified Development Ordinance. It's just that your Unified Development Ordinance also happens to have a map as part of it. Okay. Finally, 501 reminds us that while we've got to have a plan and that we have to use the plan to consider applications that change zoning text or zoning maps, that in fact, an amendment may be adopted that is inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. It is advisory in nature. It is not mandatory. The word shall, it does not include any of the shalls. That's what the Unified Development Ordinance is. It is the law. The plan is an advisory document. We try to follow it. We try to be consistent with it. If we approve something that's inconsistent with it, we should consider whether or not we should amend our plan in order to retain or remake consistency. Okay, but that's a decision that your elected officials get to make. And I wish I could tell you that in some communities, like Oregon or Georgia or Florida, you have to be consistent with your comprehensive plan. It's mandatory. But North Carolina's not there yet. It's only been 6 years since we've even required a plan in the first place. Maybe in 6 more years, we'll be at a place where, you need to follow the plan. It carries some weight, but we're not there yet. Okay? All right. Questions on this? 604 sets down y'all's responsibilities as a planning board, okay? So these are the things that you're expected to do, and it's organized into 4 main categories or types of actions. And the first is initial zoning, and what they mean there is for local governments who, for the first time ever, are adopting zoning regulations, there is a special role for the planning board. The planning board shall prepare or shall review the full text and all zoning maps as part of initial rezoning, okay? That doesn't happen that often. One good example of an initial zoning, maybe you're familiar with your neighbor to the northeast, Archer Lodge, okay? They incorporated back, I guess, maybe 10 years ago or so. I think they might be the state's youngest municipality. When Archer Lodge incorporated, they had to, for the first time, adopt their own set of zoning regulations, right? They couldn't use Clayton's or Johnston counties. They had to have their own. Their planning board went through the exercise of adopting their initial zoning regulations and their initial zoning map. So the planning board may conduct public hearings or meetings as part of this initial zoning, and you must prepare a written recommendation to the governing body before the governing body can adopt initial zoning. So that's one of the examples in the statutes where the planning board has an affirmative action that a local government may not move forward with absent a recommendation from the planning board. Planning board must make a recommendation, and if they don't, the elected officials may not move forward with adoption, okay? Now that's initial zoning, all right? That's not changes to zoning, but I want to be sure that you guys understand that. There are a couple of other instances where affirmative action of the planning board is necessary legally for an application to move forward, and I'm going to tell you what those are. Zoning amendments, okay? All subsequent amendments to that initial zoning, any changes to the text, any changes to the map, shall be reviewed by the planning board. Shall be reviewed by the planning board. You must review any amendments before consideration by the elected officials. Okay, that's what the law of the land says. Now, you may submit a written recommendation to the elected officials if you choose to, all right? But you don't have to. You're not required to. And in fact, if they give you 30 days to render a decision and you don't, they can move forward without a decision from you. But you must submit a statement of consistency or reasonableness. Whether you choose to make a recommendation is your business. You must provide guidance to the elected officials about whether or not the map or text amendment is consistent with your comprehensive plan and/or is reasonable and in the public interest. Okay? Local government cannot move forward legally without that written statement of consistency or reasonableness. Okay? That is an affirmative responsibility that you guys have to do. Okay? Now, governing body is not bound by your recommendations. And I'm sorry to say they're just not. They can choose to follow them or not. Changes to the zoning ordinance, whether that's the text or the map, is within what's called the legislative discretion of the elected officials. They exercise the discretion in terms of whether or not they choose to take your recommendation. They do not have to. They may take it and choose a different path, and that's absolutely fine. The only thing that must happen is that you must make this written statement of consistency or this written statement of reasonableness. And I'll explain the differences between those two in a moment. Now, I mentioned 160D before. It's a big chapter. There's lots and lots of pages, and there's lots and lots of stuff in this chapter. Rules about kinds of land uses, rules about subdivisions, rules about agriculture and minimum housing and building codes, all kinds of stuff. Now, the state law allows the planning board to hear any amendments to any ordinance in the community that is authorized under 160D. So not just zoning, but also text amendments that affect subdivision, minimum housing codes, certain use types, some of the building code provisions, et cetera. So that's a may, it's not a must, okay? And it's up to the elected officials to make the decisions about how and in what ways the planning board's involved in review of ordinances that are authorized under 160D, but that are not zoning or planning subject to the comprehensive plan. So I want to be sure that I don't confuse you. Zoning changes, whether that's the text or the map, you have to make a written consistency statement. Other changes that might be authorized under 160D, like minimum housing, you may review those changes and make a recommendation if the elected officials authorize you to do so, but they're not required to do so. That's something that may be done. Okay, so the laws in the state, there's very few things in the state law that says one shall do this or one shall do that. There are some things, but there's not that many. It's more of a may, okay? All right, so other ordinances, actions, you guys might be involved at the discretion of your elected officials, okay? Zoning, text, map amendments, you must be involved, all right? Plan consistency. When considering a zoning text or map amendment, the planning board has to provide that written statement of consistency with adopted plans. If there is a zoning map amendment, you must also make a statement of reasonableness, okay? We, as the planning board, find this zoning map application to be reasonable and in the public interest. Or we do not find that this application is reasonable and in the public interest, and therefore we recommend to the town council denial of this application, okay? So text amendments have a written consistency statement requirement. Map amendments have a written consistency statement for the text and a reasonableness standard for the map change, okay? So maps is 2, text is 1, okay? Got to have the statement of reasonableness when it comes to map amendments. All right? Questions about this?
Just one point of clarification for the new board members. The staff prepares a sheet for us that allows us to read with all the different options. It's typically 4 options. That would be this is consistent with the land use plan with the consistency statement, or it's inconsistent with the land use plan with a consistency statement on both whether or not we recommend or not recommend. So it's in front of us, and that's very helpful. Sometimes long-winded, but I know we can't complain about that.
For those of you who are new, every time there's an application before you, there'll be a staff report. And in that staff report, it'll assess what's before you. Staff will provide you some pros, some cons, even some things to think about. It might even make some recommendations to you. And one of those will be a series of consistency statements that you may choose from. It is consistent. It isn't consistent, and they'll give you some language that you can enter into the record in making your recommendation, okay? And for those of you who are new, if you're like, oh my God, what is he talking about? Just watch a couple of hearings and you'll get it. It's not that big of a deal. It's pretty simple, pretty basic. I say that because I too do what you do, and I sat where you sit, and I'm like, what are we doing? What, that guy's over there talking about this or that. I have no idea what's happening. And everybody goes through that. Everybody. Watch what your fellow board members do, make some mistakes. Staff will be here to correct you. You'll learn and you'll get better. So, you know, that's my 10-second pep talk on that. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Applewhite. That's it on the general statutes. I know it's a little dry, but it's important to understand the basis. You guys do have the legal right to exist. You have a legal responsibility to provide recommendations to the elected officials about consistency and reasonableness of text and map amendments. Okay? Okay. Let's talk about y'all's work within the context of the UDO. UDO is the Unified Development Ordinance. I'm sure you know that. It was adopted on November 20th of 2023, and we've amended it a couple of times. The most recent version was amended on December 16th of last year, so still a baby. It's very young. It's also very long. I believe it stands at 860 pages. If you do not have a copy of it, you should absolutely consider getting a copy of it. I'm sure that the staff would make a paper copy available to you if you wanted it. One caveat, it changes. And not frequently, but it'll change, 2 or 3 times a year. If you get a paper copy, be sure, and please, be sure that you're sure that it's the latest version of the document. Down in the lower right-hand corner of every single page will be a date that says last adopted on, last amended on. Be sure that that's the latest date, okay? There's nothing worse than quoting scripture to an applicant and it's the wrong stuff. So be careful about that if you want to choose a paper copy. I prefer the paper copy. I'm a 3-ring binder guy because I can put my notes in there and my little sticky tabs and all of that stuff. But if you're getting paper copies, be sure you got the latest version. Now, there's 4 sections in the Unified Development Ordinance that are relevant to you guys, okay? And those are them, 5 sections. Section 184 is the Planning Board. It sets out, it establishes you, it talks about your composition, your powers, your duties, your responsibilities. It also talks about something very important, which is conflict of interest. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. It's very, very important. Then there's a handful of procedures, 236, 8, 24, and 26. The 2 flavors of rezonings that we have in the Unified Development Ordinance, the street renaming procedure, and then the text amendment. So we're going to talk about these in sequence. How is this going? About the right level of detail? More detail? Less detail? Move it along? How are we? We're okay? Good? Okay. Okay, section 184 is your planning board. There's 9 members of you, which is fantastic. At least one of you needs to reside in the ETJ. Everybody knows what the ETJ is, yes? Okay, good, good. By the way, there is no shame in not knowing what some planning jargon or acronym is. Absolutely, when you come across a phrase or a term in a staff report or in the UDO that you do not understand, stop the meeting, look to the staff and say, Conrad, what is this? Okay, that's your responsibility to understand the regulations that you're administering, okay? Your powers and duties are set down in section 184. You guys are a recommendation body, generally speaking. You do not make any decisions under the Unified Development Ordinance. You do make recommendations. You're also responsible for special studies like the small area plan that was done for 42, like the master transportation plan or the comprehensive transportation plan that's underway now. We already talked about the comprehensive plan that y'all are responsible for the monitoring, assessment, and update of that document. And then the plan compliance review aspects of the text and map amendments. So those are your roles. This section also references rules of procedure. Have you seen your rules of procedure? Do you have a set of rules of procedure?
I want to say is that the one that y'all signed with regards to the policy? It's the code of conduct. So
Okay.
let me research that, Chad, and I'll give you an answer real
That's
quick
cool.
here.
No worries. You don't have to have a rules of procedure. They're not required by the state law. You may have a set of rules of procedure if you wish. The rules of procedure handle things like absences, how quorum is determined, voting issues, if you get paid, how pay works. I know you don't get paid. Does anybody get paid for this? But things like that. Rules of procedure. If you have such a document, it needs to be on the web page and available for anybody to look at. And if it turns out that you don't have one and you'd like to have one, talk to that guy over there and he can help you with that. There's lots of examples out there about rules of procedure. These are things that are not inside the UDO, mind you. They are rules specifically for you and how you'll conduct yourselves. Some planning boards have rules for once a year we're going to have a training session, right? Which is some places put that in their rules of procedure. Okay. All right. So a couple other things, please.
Just so you know, we have bylaws. That's what they're called. So, because I remember seeing that. So that's the official name for them as
Okay,
bylaws.
awesome. Be familiar with those. They're important.
Yeah, Chad, we have it on our website. We do have the Town of Clayton Bylaws Governing Board. Thank you, Mr. Chair, a board member, Saraski there, pointing that out. If we need to update that, we can always take a look at that and evaluate how that's running along. But we do have it. It's on our website under the planning board. So, what I'm doing is I'm taking notes of what Chad's pointing to, and my plan is to send you all an email with some links to kind of point you to the comprehensive plan, to the town's unified development ordinance website, to the direct links for some of those state statute sections. So that way you don't have to dig through and comb through all these different regulations, because it can be quite a bit. So
It's a lot to keep up with, but you'll be glad that it's there when you need it. It's not uncommon for bodies like yours to review their bylaws or their rules of procedure every couple of years or so. That's pretty standard. So that's something you should file away. Okay. You guys conduct public meetings. You do not conduct public hearings. There's a big difference, and we're going to talk about that in a minute. All of your voting, while you're still a recommendation body, you still vote. And the voting that you engage in is what we call simple majority. Okay, so the majority vote rules. There are other bodies and entities who operate under a different set of voting provisions. Evidentiary hearings conducted by the Board of Adjustment have a series of subtly different voting rules. Thankfully, you do not need to worry about those. You just worry about yours, which are simple majority. Quorum, got to be 5 of you to make a decision. Okay, 3 of you can conduct business. 5 of you must be present in order to vote. Okay? And these basic rules are simple, but you would be amazed at the number of local governments who fail to follow these basic rules. If you fail to follow a basic rule like quorum, and an applicant is aggrieved by your decision and files suit against the local government, they will win. Regardless of the decision that you made or how hard you deliberated or what you did right or what you did wrong. These basic provisions like quorum, like some of the other provisions that are set down in your bylaws, are basic and have to be met, okay? Even if you make the right decision, if you make it in the wrong way, guess what? If somebody chooses to pursue litigation, they'll be successful. And that's not good. We don't want that. Because now, in this environment, one of the things that comes with a judgment against a local government is a responsibility to pay the legal fees of the person who brought the suit. And those numbers can have 2 commas in them. And that's a lot of money. So we want to try to avoid that, okay? Conflict of interest, the last important topic. You guys make recommendations. You need to avoid even the semblance of a conflict of interest. Okay, a conflict of interest is one where you are unable to make a fair, informed decision. Okay, and the state sets down some rules for us to follow about what is a conflict of interest. Anything that is a direct, substantial financial interest to you is something that you may not vote on. If it's your business, if it's your spouse's business, if it's your child's business, right? Those are direct familial relationships that keep you from being impartial, and therefore you need to recuse yourself from being involved in a vote about a text amendment or a map amendment that affects you financially directly, or a member of your family, okay? So if you have a question, oh my goodness, I'm not sure, do I have a conflict of interest or not? Ask the staff. Ask the chair. Sometimes in my world, we have board members who need to recuse themselves, but don't want to. And in those instances, we have a discussion about it and we take a vote about whether or not that person's going to be allowed to continue to participate in the making of a decision. The stakes are not as high with the planning board because you're not thumbing up, thumbing down development applications, but nonetheless, you do have a responsibility to avoid conflict of interest. Okay, so if there's any sort of financial relationship, any sort of business or familial relationship, you need to strongly consider asking, or if you even think there's a semblance of conflict of interest, the right thing for you to do is recuse yourself, okay? And how you do that is you raise your hand and you say, Mr. Chair, I have a conflict of interest. I need to recuse myself from this case. Get up, you leave the room, the case is deliberated. When it's done, you return, okay? All right. Questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
In a case like conflict of interest, does that also, I presume it would, but clarify for me, does that fall the category of design or intellectual property fall into that? Because as a landscape architect, I deal with a lot of developers, and I'm a lot of times on the very front end of preliminary designs and stuff. And I may work on properties or work with developers and come up with something they're happy with. It immediately gets handed off to an engineering firm or design firm, and they flesh out, they make their submittals and everything. So it may be months down the road, a year down the road, this project that I've worked on for a few hours comes back, and it's a project here in the town of Clayton. And I'm sitting on the board.
Right.
Is that grounds for immediately recusing myself?
Here's a simple test for you to use.
Okay.
Have you been paid for that work? If you've been paid for that work, a conflict of interest likely does not exist. If you have not been paid, then absolutely a conflict of interest exists and you need to recuse yourself.
All right.
Okay?
Cool. Thank you.
I think kind of like a follow-up would be, you may recuse yourself from a vote, but are you recusing yourself from discussion?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit about some of the procedures that you guys get involved in. These 2 pages, pages 48 and 49 from a Unified Development Ordinance, set down the 35, 36 different kinds of development review procedures that exist in your UDO. I've put some yellow highlight on the planning board column, okay? So in case you're not familiar with this table, I'll walk you through it very, very quickly. Down the sides of the tables are the procedures that are part of the Unified Development Ordinance. People file applications for these various things here in Clayton. Across the top of the table are the different review bodies who make decisions on those applications. And you guys are listed between Planning Director and Town Council, okay? Now, Wherever you see an R, that stands for recommendation. That means the planning board is responsible for making a recommendation to the town council on that particular kind of an application. And you'll note that there are Rs at the conditional rezoning row, the conventional rezoning row, the street renaming closure row, and the text amendment row. So those are the 4 procedures that you guys are responsible for. You make recommendations to the town council based on the standards and review criteria that are set down in those little gray numbers right after the name, okay? Click on that link in your digital UDO, be taken to those development review procedure sections, and the review criteria that you need to use to exercise your recommendation are listed there for you, okay? But we'll talk more about each one of these. Starting with conditional rezoning. Does everybody know what conditional rezoning is? It's okay if you don't. Okay. So a rezoning is when we're making a change to the zoning map. The zoning map, it covers all of the land in the corporate limits and the ETJ. It assigns a zoning district designation to every single piece of property, minus roadways, okay? Now, there's 2 different kinds of rezoning applications. There's a conventional rezoning application, which I'll talk about in a moment, and a conditional rezoning application, okay? The conditional rezoning application, I'm talking about it first because it comes sooner in the alphabet than conventional. But conditional rezoning is simply this. It is a zoning map amendment that is subject to proffered conditions by the applicant. The applicant has proposed a set of conditions or constraints to their application that they are voluntarily accepting and proposing or proffering to the community, okay? I might seek to establish a gas station on a piece of commercial property, okay? Property that is zoned for general commercial, general business. I might want to do a gas station, okay? The land in question has a residential zoning district designation that doesn't allow gas stations. So I need to change the zoning map to permit my gas station because it's not allowed in the zoning district designation that exists today. Now, I've talked to the neighbors. They don't want a gas station next door. They're unhappy about that, okay? And they're going to show up at the meeting and they're going to complain to you and they're going to complain to the elected officials and they're going to make me look bad and make me sad and embarrassed because that's what happens at these sorts of things. Now, I might, being the smart person that I am, seek to condition my rezoning application by saying, look, I want to do a gas station. I know there's some neighbors around who don't really like that. So what I'm going to do is make my gas station look like the Biltmore estate. And I'm going to have lots of landscaping there. And it's going to be the most beautiful gas station in the entire universe. And this is how I'm going to make it happen. Those are examples of conditions. Okay. I am voluntarily proffering or offering to the community a higher level of design quality, increased landscaping, more open space, better roadways, increased compliance with design standards, smaller signage, whatever it is. Maybe it's a variety of things. The conditional rezoning process is the process where the applicant wants to change the zoning map and they are making their application subject to conditions that they are offering. Those conditions generally equate to more restriction, but not always. Okay, so like life, conditional rezoning is not that simple. There's a variety of different kinds of conditional rezoning, okay? Staff is going to explain this to you as you guys move through your exercises, but I'll just say this. There's 3 flavors of conditional zoning, okay? There is a limited use flavor, there is a limited standard flavor, and there is an unlimited flavor. And let me explain those distinctions to you. Limited use conditional rezonings are ones where I want to propose one use. I'm going to bar my ability to accommodate any of the other range of allowable uses that might be permitted in that zoning district. And I'm doing that willingly, voluntarily. Remember the example I gave you a moment ago where I needed to go to general business to have my gas station. General business allows all kinds of things: tattoo parlors, slaughterhouses. I'm just picking on crazy things, but understand I'm doing that for a point. I might say to myself, wow, no wonder my neighbors are angry. I want to rezone this to general business, and it allows slaughterhouses. They don't want that next door to them. What can I do? Oh, I can propose a condition that says I'm not going to build a slaughterhouse here. I only want to do a gas station. I know that I have the right to do all of these things. I will voluntarily limit myself to one kind of use. I do that to make the neighbors around me happy so they don't come and complain to you, okay? That's why I do that. And that's a conditional rezoning. A limited use flavor is I'm only going to go with one use and I'm foregoing all of the other uses. And this is binding on this property, okay? If I sell this property, they don't get to do anything other than a gas station either, unless they come back before you for another rezoning. Now, flavor 2 is called limited standards. And what that means is I want to have more landscaping. I want to have less parking. I want to have smaller signs. I want to have higher quality of design. I want to make the building look like Biltmore, whatever. The point is, I am voluntarily agreeing to follow development standards that are more restrictive than the regulation. I'm going to go farther than what the UDO says I have to do. Why do I do that? To make the neighbors happy. Or maybe I'm altruistic and I like gas stations that look like the Biltmore building. I don't know. But the point is, here is the vehicle that I can use to condition my application to a higher standard in pursuit of acceptance by my neighbors or by the elected officials, because they might want my gas station to look like Biltmore too, okay? Finally, the unlimited flavor. Now, everything I just told you, set aside, okay? Because the unlimited conditional rezoning allows me to negotiate with you. Some of the things I might include in my development might be more restrictive. The building might look like the Biltmore house, but other things I might seek some reductions. I might not want to provide as much open space as is required. I might want a larger sign than what I can have, or brighter lights. I might want to do Buc-ee's, right? So an unlimited conditional zoning map allows me to blend my request. I can ask for things that are less restrictive than the regulation, okay? I can have more restrictive things in there too, but generally if I'm going to ask for unlimited, it's because I'm seeking some kind of reduction, all right? Now, when I seek a reduction, guess what? I have to prove to you why it's a good development, how this development is better than what would result from a strict application of the standards. That's my job as an applicant, is to explain to you why my gas station that looks like Biltmore is better than what might result from a strict application of the standards, all right? That's where a concept plan comes into play, okay? Type 3 conditional rezoning has a concept plan with it. That's me handing you a piece of paper that says, I'll build this. If you approve my application, I'll give you this, okay? That does not exist in conventional rezoning, okay? It does not exist in limited use conditional rezoning. It may or may not exist in limited standard conditional rezoning, but it is the applicant's discretion to choose to provide a concept plan or not. For an unlimited, I must provide a plan, okay? Now, unlimited type 3 conditional rezonings, you'll probably see a few of those. You're likely to see more limited use ones, okay? Those are probably the most common, right? Because I just want to do my gas station and get out of here and do my thing and not deal with, angry neighbors. So I might try to keep it as simple as I could. The limited use is the way for me to do that. However, larger developments, bigger sites often do follow the unlimited sort of process. And there'll be a concept plan that needs to be reviewed by the technical review committee before it comes to you. And that technical review committee will make recommendations to you about potential conditions that you might want to add onto that conditional rezoning. Now, earlier you heard me talk about hypotheticals, right? Remember that part in the little black colored slides? Suggest to you that maybe in the next time I come out, we go through a type 3 conditional rezoning case so that you guys can get a sense and flavor for how that works and what we might do. So log that in the back of your mind. Maybe we do a hypothetical on a type 3 conditional rezoning, because this is something we could talk about for hours. It is complicated, but it's also very flexible. It's very positive. It can be very positive. It can also be abused. So definitely something for us to talk about. There's a handful of review criteria that you'll consider for conditional rezonings. They're set down in 236J. And like all text amendments, map amendments, you guys have to make a written statement of consistency with the comprehensive plan. This conditional rezoning is not consistent with the comprehensive plan. This conditional rezoning is not reasonable and in the public interest. Okay, so that's part of y'all's responsibility to share that information with the council, and that's required by law. Okay, that's conditional rezoning. Okay, remember, applicant fetters or limits their application based on proffers that they're given to you. Type 3 does allow them to negotiate with you, and you enter into this discussion about conditions. You'll depend on staff for a lot of that discussion. As you guys get better at this and more practice with this, you'll start proposing your own conditions. Gee, Chad, I don't think I want a gas station that looks like Biltmore. I think I'd rather it look like Versailles, right? So make it look like that. It's obviously a crazy example, but you get the point.
Chad, sorry to jump in here. So on that, real quick. So when you get a conditional rezoning, staff has conducted an administrative review of that concept plan. We've evaluated the conditions of approval. We've had discussions with the applicant. So I know there's a hypothetical of the Biltmore and the Versailles, but I just want to make sure that when you get an application from staff, the technical review committee has reviewed the concept plan, provided comments. So there's been a lot of back and forth. So usually when you get this, when you receive a project, it's going to be pretty well formulated for you all to make a solid recommendation. So that way, if there are design questions or if there's concerns about traffic, if there's concerns about, you can have those from an educated standpoint. Our staff report will have all the analysis, we'll have supplemental information, we'll have draft conditions of approval that are signed by the applicant, and you'll have a concept plan. So when you get this a type 3 concept plan, you're going to have a really good product that I think you'll be able to have an educated conversation with the applicant, basically live. So just wanted to throw that in there as well.
Thank you, Conrad. And you're absolutely right.
We have had frequent, and it seems like more in the last year than ever before, but we've had frequent situations where, especially, we've had a public hearing, and then this board has said, you know, would you be willing to add additional parking, widen your parking? Would you make the fence 8 feet high instead of 6 feet high so this neighbor can't see it? And those folks have agreed to those things prior to our voting.
Right. Very typical. Very, very typical.
I do have one question. This is the one I kind of came with, because the town of Smithfield just went through this, and with a 210 single-family residence development. And they said architectural design standards from the town will require no less than 2 materials on the front facade of all homes, a minimum of 1 window per side. I won't continue, but they've got all these requirements listed. Does the town of Clayton get that specific in residential requirements for, let's say, single-family developments?
We haven't gone down the road of the number of windows that would be conditioned. What we have discussed a lot is the material type. So vinyl siding, for instance, council has not been comfortable with that kind of material. So applicants will be informed of council's kind of preference. So hardy plank will be proffered as a trim. The state statutes, as far as the reason why that can become a conditional, because the state statutes don't allow us to regulate design for single-family detached housing. So if it's a use by right in a zone district and you want to put in a house, you can put in a house that to your design's discretion. So often when you have a development with, 200 homes, for instance, as in this case, you're going to have that be part of the conditional process, the conditional rezoning process, and that's where you can start to have some design considerations, if you will, for the end product. We didn't really touch on this, but in table 4.25 of the UDO has a list of all the uses, the principal uses that are allowed by right in each district, as well as uses that would only be allowed as a conditional zoning. While a duplex is a good example, it's allowed in certain districts, but we've made that type of product a conditional rezoning really because a duplex falls in that kind of protected realm of design. So staff and council felt comfortable if a duplex was to come forth for a property, for us to have that kind of design consideration so that it blends with the existing character of the community. We can have those design standards put as a condition of approval.
And I guess my follow-up and final question on this is, doesn't that get into the realm of affordability when you start placing those type of conditions on residential homes? And I was just surprised to see, and they've done this a couple of times now on a couple of different developments that, by the way, were in the floodplain.
So the floodplain concern is probably, something that we would consider as part of the concept plan. So we would have that kind of study analysis, making sure that product isn't being put into floodplain. Some steep slopes comes up sometimes also when we have a master or a concept plan that shows a design that might have some steep slopes considerations. As far as affordability, that's a great question. I think that's why we have so many text amendments, right? We are looking at how do we make sure that the requirements aren't putting a product in a state where it's unfeasible, because as Chad pointed out earlier, there are other towns that people can build in. And so what we want to do is find that sweet spot where we can have the quality of development while also attract interest in Clayton.
We've had situations where, like we had one last year before last, where there were some townhomes that were going to be on the exterior of the development and single-family homes on the interior, and neighbors complained about what things were looking like. And so through this board, I think they ended up, the developer decided to move the townhomes more internally and the single-family homes to the outside. So you're seeing single-family homes, not seeing townhomes. Didn't make any difference to me, but to the neighbors, apparently, that made a difference as far as what they were seeing. So we've done some things like that where people make adjustments. But I think what Conrad's saying and what you're saying is sometimes we ask, somebody what the density is per acre, and you'll see people pushing that limit. They'll be over it, but then they've got open space they're, given because it's really space they can't use, they can't build on. So we know what that deal is. But there's been instances where we've pushed them to bring that density down, but as he says, there's a fine line before it doesn't make sense for them to develop a piece of property if they've got to then, they're losing 30 units all of a sudden, then all that revenue is gone from them. It just goes away. And so there is a fine line, I think. And I think we try as a board to see how much we can get from a developer without just completely pushing them away.
It is absolutely a question of balance. It is absolutely a question of balance. And to your point, can design requirements raise the price of development? Yes. Yes, they can. At the same time, another consideration that you have to factor in is, Clayton has a finite amount of land. They're not making any more of it. Okay. And so you need to use what you have efficiently, because if you don't, taxes go up. So you have to balance that. So when development comes, you want to be sure that the ad valorem that the town is going to enjoy from that development at least equals the price that you're going to have for servicing that development, whether that's with police or fire or utilities, what have you. So it is very much a balance. And, you know, I would say this is a topic that it warrants deep, deep discussion. There are many, many aspects to this. There's some public policy aspects, there's some fiscal aspects, there's some fairness aspects to it. And, you know, as Conrad said, you know, Clayton tries to thread the needle here. And you guys have a very important role in that process. It may be that you see somebody who wants to do a development and the town says, we expect this, we expect that. And you see that that's going to increase the price of that development. And maybe you think that's unfair, or maybe you think that's inappropriate, and that's when you would speak up as a planning board member and say, I think this or I think that. You might also see an applicant say, well, gosh, your design standards are expensive, and so here is how I would propose we address that. And they might propose some other alternative that maybe hadn't occurred up to that point. So I encourage you to be open to the negotiated process, to be open to the flexibility process. The conditional rezoning process cuts both ways. Not only does the applicant use it to achieve their ends, local governments use it to achieve theirs as well. And it takes two of us to tango. Okay?
Just one other comment, Chad. To that point of it takes two to tango, and it includes the community as well. So in many cases, some of the, you know, you'll see this room full of folks that have an opinion about the development that's coming up next door, and they deserve a fair hearing on what is going to affect their property values just as much as the developer and the town and the folks on the board. So
absolutely
something to consider. And with that, I just as an idea, I think it would be helpful at some point, maybe in a few months, to have both the council and the planning board come together and have a conversation about the UDO and development generally. It would be helpful for us as a planning board to understand what the council's goals are, to help inform not only our decision making, but what, you know, the general flow of ideas are surrounding development. So I just put that out there as a plug for something like that in the future.
And I have like a follow-up comment. This is just more out of my pure curiosity, but rough numbers for staff. How often does town council actually consider our recommendations to the T? Because I don't want to get too much into hypotheticals, but since we're a recommendation board, theoretically, we could approve a conditional rezoning with conditions, and the town council could just say, well, I'm approving it as it was, regardless of the conditions. So
That's a great question. I don't have a data sheet. I haven't tracked that. Anecdotally, I can tell you that the recommendations that have come from the board do get incorporated into staff's reports, and they have been, I think what's important, I'll backtrack here, is what your recommendation results in is a conversation with the developer and a council member, and they kind of do end up having some modifications to their plan. And that really, what I kind of like to see your meeting as a dress rehearsal for the actual public hearing. It's an opportunity for the applicants, for council. We have a council liaison, Councilwoman Andrea Archer. She's on the board. So it's of interest to the council to hear what is occurring with the community. It helps staff to guide developers, because at the end of the day, I think we want to see a project succeed. We want to see something benefit Clayton. But yeah, that's a great question. I think it leads to conversations that is occurring before it goes to council, or council can then have that question. But I feel like there's been a positive response and alignment between planning board's recommendations and council's final decisions.
I will say this. I know that I think, and it's just anecdotal just from me watching it, but I think there's more often we will recommend something and the council will say no, as opposed to if we say no, the council's saying yes. If we say no, they usually say no. Sometimes they say no when we say yes. And I know there was a time a couple of years ago where they asked us as a board to be a little more hard-hitting, I guess, as a board when we're meeting with people. Don't just be so quick to say, well, you know, what we say doesn't matter, so let's just say yes to get them out of here and the town council will decide. Because we kind of, for lack of a better way of saying it, we run cover for them to some extent that you know, if we say no and the town says no, if we were to be sued, it's not only one body saying no, it was two deliberative bodies saying no. And it gives the town a little protection, not absolute protection, but more protection than not when we do it the right way. I think they follow us from that standpoint.
The council listens to you. The council uses you as a dress rehearsal. That's your role. We're exploring the possible here, and it's easier for them to go into negotiations with a set of recommendations prepared by the planning board that are quote unquote hard hitting. That allows them to be peacemakers and be good cop instead of bad cop, which they like. But don't lose sight of the fact that the real objective here is to make sure that the development that's proposed is consistent with the comprehensive plan, which is what we said, this is what we want to be. So that's why it's so important and why it's always our touchstone and why we always go back to it, is because that's the document that we worked with the community on, and it enunciates and ameliorates or whatever, and it indicates what we want, the kind of development we want, where we want it, and what we want it to look like. Okay? All right, so that's conditional rezoning. Remember this. Applicant comes forward, they condition their request based on some kinds of limitations or some kind of negotiation that they voluntarily propose. Okay? That's conditional rezoning. This is by far the most complicated kind of application that you will get. Okay? You will be seeing more conditional rezonings in the coming years because of changes to state law. Okay? You will see more. But let's talk about conventional rezoning because that's still something that you will also see. Now, this is just like conditional zoning. We're talking about a change to the zoning map, but there's one big difference. And the difference is conventional rezonings may not be conditioned. You have to consider the full range of allowable use types that are permissible in that zoning district. Doesn't matter what the applicant says he wants. You have to consider what's allowable, okay? Because just because I want a gas station doesn't mean that the next guy who comes along is going to have a gas station. He might want the slaughterhouse, and if that's allowed in the district, you need to think about that. Okay, that's an important part of your role, is to understand what's the possible, not just what's proposed. Okay? Now, we don't allow third-party downzoning. And what that means is I, as a neighbor, can't propose a rezoning application to downzone your property, to make your property have a lower development potential. That's prohibited by law. Okay? New twist. A month ago, the General Assembly said, guess what, local governments? You can't initiate downzoning requests either. Okay, so this is a new thing that we're still coming to grips with, and I encourage you guys to talk to staff and get some more information about these changes in legislation because they are profound in terms of what they're going to do to conventional rezoning applications, which in my humble opinion is that they will all but vanish because local governments will not have the ability to come back and make changes to those conventional rezoning designations in the future. That is not a subject for today. Plant that seed for next time I come and see you and we can talk more about it. If you thought conditional rezoning was complicated, wait till we get to that. Now, conventional rezonings also considered during a public meeting. You have a set of separate review criteria that you follow. And just like with conditional zoning, you guys have to make a written statement of reasonableness and consistency. Okay? Wouldn't worry too much about these. I think these things are becoming dinosaurs for reasons that we might discuss in the future. Just remember to ask staff about Senate Bill 382, and they'll tell you about it. Okay? Street renaming closure. So if you've got a street that's out there today, whether it exists, whether there's pavement on the ground, or it just exists on paper, it's just a platted street that somebody had in a subdivision at some point in the past that was accepted as a public street, even though it might not exist, there's still a process that the town has to follow under state law to close that. That paper street may never become a street, But there's a process that the town has to use to get that off of our maps and to cede that property back to the landowners who gave it in the first place. There's also a procedure, it happens to be the same one, if you want to change the name of a street. Okay, so there's a process in place. I think you guys recently did some street name changes, didn't you? I feel like there's a couple big name changes that you guys did recently. I don't know, I can't remember what they are, but the point is that this is a process that does get used. And you guys make a recommendation to council about, should we close this street or not? Is this name appropriate or not? How does the public feel about this? Because remember, when it's an existing street and the street name changes, guess what? I have to change my address. And that's a cost that comes along with the street name change, okay? Requires a public meeting, also requires a neighborhood meeting, just like the more intense rezoning cases. There's a couple of sets of criteria for closure. There's 4 for renaming, and you need to make a recommendation to council, okay? So you guys are involved and you hear in public meeting, street closure and renaming, okay? All right.
Question.
Sure.
Does this only apply to municipally owned roads or is it all roads?
Wow, great question. These are public streets.
Any public road?
Any public street.
Did we?
Because we didn't vote on the NCDOT 42
didn't.
change.
That is that's a state street, so they own those. Public streets that you are responsible for, that you maintain.
So something the town of Clayton would maintain, looking after, that's the ones that, not ones that are
The
state.
ones that you have the responsibility for maintaining, those public streets. Good question.
Conrad, question about conditional rezoning. Is it the case that if you approve some set of conditions, does that kind of set a precedent for what you might be expected to approve for the next case that comes? I mean, the next similar kind of case, or is it really more individual case by case?
I'm not an attorney, but I'm going to give you an attorney answer, which is it depends. Generally speaking, land use decisions are not precedent setting, and you shouldn't think about them in that way. As a practical matter, over the arc of time, do people reuse the same kinds of conditions? Yeah, they sure do. In fact, those things often turn into text amendments. As we require the same sets of conditions over and over again. Ultimately, folks like you come to people like me and say, can't we just put this in the code so I don't have to have these conditions in, because we require it every time anyway, so what's the point? So, you know, generally speaking, no, there are no precedents. Practically speaking, it's very common for similar conditions to find their way case after case.
Yeah, we make our precedents with the maps, with the plans. That's where we make our precedents. That's why we're saying we would hope one day everything would conform with the land use maps and the comprehensive plan. Correct.
Okay. Text amendments, these are amendments to the ordinance text, not the maps, okay? So a couple of distinctions here. One is there's 2 ways that these things can start. They can be initiated by the town or they can be initiated by an applicant. Anybody who owns property or is a resident or lives in Clayton can bring forward a text amendment application. However, we only process applicant-initiated text amendments a couple of times a year. That's done for purposes of workload management. Frankly, it's also done to make sure that the person who's proposing the text amendment is serious about it. Okay, because it could be very expensive and time-consuming to wrap this body's time up in frivolous, unnecessary text amendments, and it does happen. People do text amendments as speculative things. We're changing your laws, okay? And that has meaning, and it takes time, and it costs money, and you should be thoughtful about that process. And so that's the reason why town-initiated applications aren't subject to any sort of temporal limitations. Applicant-initiated text amendment applications are handled twice a year, okay? I mentioned 382. And this next bullet point is part of that. And again, maybe a conversation for my next visit. Any changes that create nonconformities for existing development going forward in the state of North Carolina, unless 382 changes or you're exempted from it, any changes that create nonconformities, and I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment, require prior consent from the landowners who are affected by that change. So let me give you a hypothetical. Let's say for the sake of argument, I'm talking about gas stations, so let's just stay with it. Let's just say for the sake of argument that Clayton's current code says all gas stations must have 5 parking spaces, okay? That's the rule. Over the arc of time, you guys figure out 5's not enough. We're getting gas stations now in Clayton that have a lot of traffic. They've got a restaurant, they've got a doctor's office, they've got a coffee shop, they've got a cat adoption, whatever it is that they've got. 5 is not enough. We need 7. Should have at least 7 parking spaces for every gas station in Clayton going forward, okay? So, staff initiates text amendment to make that change. We're going to go from 5 required spaces to 7 for gas stations. Okay. Senate Bill 382 requires you now to get consent to adopt that regulation from everybody who has an existing gas station in Clayton who doesn't have 7 parking spaces, because adoption of that law creates a nonconformity, which is not permitted. Okay? So, changes that create nonconformities for existing development require prior owner consent. That is the law of the land in place today. Maybe the town will seek exemption. Maybe the General Assembly will rescind that law. Maybe the League of Municipalities will have success and help us out of this mess. But that is the law of the land right now, and it will be very problematic for us going forward. And that's why I would like to talk about this in my next visit, because conditions may have changed and we'll have more time. But this is a serious matter. This isn't like, oh, this might happen. This will affect almost everything you do that's a text amendment.
So if you have to go back and get the consent from all the prior owners,
All the affected owners.
all the effective owners, because they were there first, they had to, okay. That's not because they would be expected to then add 2 more parking spaces.
That's correct.
What is correct? They would be expected to do that?
No.
Oh, they would be grandfathered in. They're, okay,
But you still have to have their consent.
okay.
Grandfathering in is what existed before December 11th, 2024. You would change the rules, and if you didn't conform, you just didn't conform, and that was okay. Now, the rule is, I got to have, we must have your consent to make the change. You still don't have to comply. This is a problem.
Chad, and to that point on nonconformities, we have a whole section in the code that deals with nonconformities. If they want to expand or redevelop, and all these, there are rules and that they can follow and processes for them to do that.
Yes, there are. There's a significant set of rules in there about how we handle nonconformities, but we have just scratched the surface of this issue. And I would encourage us to talk about this in a couple of months as we've continued to think through all of the ramifications here, because in fact, people like me and most land use attorneys are still trying to figure out what all this law means, because we're not sure. This is less than 2 months old. Okay. Text amendments, 7 review criteria, requires that statement of reasonableness and consistency, just like the zoning map amendments, okay? Doing on time. Okay, we're at 7:30. Sure. Not a lot. A few. Definitely want to talk about this a little bit, but want to be respectful of y'all's time and smooth sailing, which was my promise at the beginning of this meeting. Those of you who are involved in the UDO know I can't leave the room unless I've been here for 2 hours. I mean, come on. I'm teasing. So we'll quickly touch on some of this stuff. Ask the staff to give you a copy of this presentation, and I encourage you to think and work together about a time when I might come back in a few months when you've got a light night, and we might talk some more about some of this public meeting stuff and maybe do some of these hypotheticals like a type 3 conditional rezoning. or how we go about adopting a comprehensive transportation plan, which will be in front of you guys, I think, in the near future. So let's talk about this. Public meeting process. There's 7 things to cover here. Like Conrad said, there's a lot of slides. These are the 7 topics that we're going to cover. Now, I mentioned before, and you guys understand this, Planning Board conducts public meetings, not public hearings. That's a big, big difference, okay? You still follow the legislative public hearing procedure, but public meetings are different in 2 significant ways. 1, they do not require prior public notice to adjacent landowners, okay? Public hearings require notice to adjacent landowners. Public meetings do not, okay? That's state law. Now, you guys might choose to provide public notice to adjacent landowners as part of a public meeting. That is your choice. It is not a requirement. You must provide notice to adjacent landowners for a public hearing. That's not y'all. Y'all do public meetings. That's one difference. Who gets notified, okay? Second difference is who can come and speak, okay? Public meetings are open to the public, okay? It's a public meeting. They're open to the public. However, do I have to listen to anybody say a word? You do not. Are not required under North Carolina law to accept public testimony during a public meeting. Yes, the public's invited. Yes, there is a general notice. The planning board is going to meet on this day in this room. Here's the agenda of things they're going to cover. Must you take testimony? No. That is in your discretion as the chair. Whoever's chairing the meeting gets to make the decision about whether or not public testimony is going to be accepted. Now, you generally do, and there would probably be riots in the streets if you didn't, but it is important to know that you're not required to, and that has a lot of relevance for what testimony you take and how you take it, okay? Because you don't have to listen to 8,000 people come up here and say the same thing over and over again. That never happens, does it? You can assign time limits. You can stop repetitive testimony. You can ask representatives to represent large groups. You can and you should. Okay, so just because it's a public meeting, you do not have to accommodate every single person in the audience. You can assign time limits, ask for representatives, limit repetitive testimony. Okay, that's you are authorized to do that under the law. Okay, so just want to be sure that you understand that. Minutes of the meeting must be recorded, and you may continue the meeting, ideally to a date certain. However, you don't have to pick a date certain because guess what? There's no notice. So date certain is not a must under the law. Questions?
I have one. As a matter of courtesy, the county does advise adjacent landowners. They send notice. Does the town at all?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we choose to notice the same property owner radius, which is 300 feet, that we use for our public hearing. So we are noticing you got a property in question. We draw a 300-foot buffer, and all the properties within that radius get a letter from us saying that the public meeting for the planning board is going to be held, and we do the same thing for the public hearing. We also post the property. So we'll post the property. I don't know if it's a corner lot, we'll put one on each street frontage. We do that also for the public hearing. The public hearing has the additional level of just a legal ad being published in a local newspaper. So other than the legal ad, which we are not required as a part of the public meeting, to Chad's point, yeah, we notice the same exact property owner radius and post the property as if it was a public hearing. So 300 foot's the radius that we go with.
That's a policy choice. So it's an abundance of caution. And it's whether or not it's good policy or bad policy isn't for me to say. It's just what you choose to do. And that's just fine. One other key distinction between a public meeting and a public hearing is that when you have a public hearing, people do get to come and talk. If you show up and you wish to speak, then you have to be heard. Okay, but not so a public meeting. All right, just want to be sure that you guys understand that. Okay. This is the legislative procedure that you follow. Okay, when you guys are having a public meeting.
Sorry to jump in. A public hearing and a public meeting. So the public hearing is with town council, just as a clarification. So public meeting is the planning board. Public hearing is what town council does.
This is different from what the applicant may be required to notify people within a certain.
Yes,
Their meeting.
yes.
It's not, that's a different.
That's a whole different thing. When they're doing a neighborhood meeting or something like that, there's a whole different set of provisions that apply there. Okay. In North Carolina, remember we talked about 160D. You remember that? 160D says to local governments, when you adopt an ordinance, okay? In other words, when you make a change to your zoning ordinance or your zoning map, there must be a public hearing, okay? That public hearing is conducted by the elected officials. You may conduct a public meeting, or you may conduct a second public hearing if you wish with your planning board, okay? Your planning board still has a responsibility to provide the statement of consistency and reasonableness. That's a law, it's a code requirement, okay? But that statement of consistency can be developed and rendered during a public meeting or a public hearing at the discretion of the town. Here in Clayton, planning board operates during public meetings, okay? Everybody who comes, I'm sure you guys let them testify, which is just fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I just want to be sure that you understand that you don't have to. Okay, this isn't a legal requirement. So if you've got some people who are belligerent or causing you problems or interfering with you guys exercising your responsibilities, okay, you don't have to settle for that. All right? Okay. Legislative procedure, staff report is given, the meeting's open, there's a presentation by staff, the applicant speaks, everybody in support speaks, people who oppose speak. It's your discretion as the chair whether or not they get to testify at all. You close your testimony. We're not taking any more. That's when you deliberate, you make a decision, and there's written recommendation in this statement, okay? This is a lot of material. I would encourage you guys to look carefully at this stuff. This compares and contrasts the legislative procedure, what you use, with the evidentiary procedure, what the Board of Adjustment uses. They have a very formal legal process. You guys follow the legislative process. It's much more open, much more permissive, okay? Not as strict, not as rigid, okay? This is an important slide for you to digest. Maybe not right now, but in the coming days and weeks. The differences between site plans and concept plans, okay? Concept plans are general. Remember, concept plans come with type 3 conditional rezonings, okay? Concept plans are at the beginning of the process, there to determine the feasibility of the proposal. They're general in nature. They're not specific, okay? So understand the difference between site plans and concept plans. And remember, a concept plan that you're seeing as part of a conditional rezoning has already been vetted by staff. Their technical review committee has already gone over that concept plan, and they'll make recommendations to you about things that maybe need to change in that concept plan as part of y'all's discussion.
And if the conditional rezoning is approved by town council, the applicant will then go back through staff to get the site plan and all the other
You better
details
believe
squared
it.
away.
That's exactly right. Just because you got a concept plan approved does not mean you got a site plan approved. Okay? All right. When you guys are considering zoning and text amendments, there are some allowable factors that you can consider as part of your decision. Remember, there's criteria, right? Each one of these development application procedures sets down criteria that you use to make the decision. There are other things that you can introduce. Remember, whoa, I can never get that back thing. We'll get there. I'm going to get all fancy on you guys. Decision based solely on codified standards. Under the legislative procedure, what you guys do, your decision is not based solely on codified standards. You guys can apply that magic word, discretion. what's in your discretion. Okay, so you can apply that. Not so if you were on the Board of Adjustment doing the evidentiary procedure, you have to base your decision on the codified standards. You guys are in the fabled catbird seat of allowing discretion in your decision making. There are factors that you can consider and factors that you cannot consider in addition to the criteria. This is a list of 7 or 8 things that you can consider in your deliberations. Public health, consistency with the plan or policy guidance, the character of the area where it's located, value of appropriate uses of land, applicable review criteria, etc. So these are things that you can base your decision on. I'm telling you this because there's some things that you cannot base your decision on. Anything listed on this page, you may not use as a basis for a recommendation, okay? Very, very important that you follow these. Most of these are federal in nature. Okay?
Chad, can I ask a quick question? Sure. This might be something to consider. So we might get a conditional rezoning that is going to be doing affordable housing, and they're going to be giving some housing of certain, area medium incomes. How would that play if they're proffering that and they're committing to that kind of housing with regards to this list here?
Well, Mr. Amelio, I see you're here trying to do a rezoning before us, and I'm going to suggest that we impose a condition that says that the homes in your development are only made available for people who make $200,000 a year or more. That is an example of an impermissible factor or consideration, okay? Or we are going to require as a condition of approval that your development not allow children or people with red hair or planners. Not that anybody would ever want to do that, but those are some examples of things that are impermissible that you cannot base decisions on, nor can you propose conditions to address. Okay.
What about the price of rent? So sometimes you might go, what are those new units going to cost for monthly rent?
Off the table.
Okay.
Chad, what about the amount of students attending local schools?
Off the table. And by the way, a lot of people get tied up in this kind of school capacity issue and what does the local school board say? Okay. Have you ever heard the school say we can't accommodate these children? Nope. And you never will, because their responsibility is to provide education to children, regardless of how many there are. You will never hear a school board say, don't approve this school because we can't handle the kids. You've never heard that before, and you'll never hear it in the state of North Carolina. Further, we can't have adequate public facility requirements based on schools. It's not allowed in North Carolina. There are 2 local governments that can do it. You're not one of them, okay? Which is a discussion for a whole nother day. In any case, impermissible factors for consideration, there are some, and keep those in mind, okay? Conditions of approval, you guys have the ability to suggest, work with applicants to structure these, okay? But there's some guardrails. Making sure that they're proportional to the impact, okay? Making sure that they're reasonable, that they're reasonably related to the impacts that are created. I can't stress the second one enough. Measurable and trackable, right? Well, gee, we want to be sure that you don't have any Airbnbs in this development, right? That's a very common kind of a condition that people would like to include. The neighbors don't want Airbnb here, so we're not going to allow you to have that. How are you going to track that? How are you going to enforce that? Not possible. Okay, so try to avoid conditions that are not measurable, trackable, or implementable. The applicant needs to agree in writing to all conditions, okay? Otherwise, they are not enforceable. It's not so much of a concern for you guys, it's more of a concern for the elected officials. The written consent needs to be collected before they make their final decision, all right? Compliance with federal law, I can't write a condition that limits the kinds of, race or creed or gender that's allowable. And then finally, there's a set of provisions in UDO section 2410 that pertain to conditions of approval that you need to comply with, Okay? And that's really it. I know we ran through those very, very quickly. I especially encourage you to spend some time understanding the distinctions between site plans and concept plans. Those are very, very important. And for your own edification, understanding the difference between the legislative process, the one you use, versus the evidentiary process, the one that's used by the Board of Adjustment. Okay? Very instructive to understand those distinctions. And that, I think, is probably where we'll call it a night, unless there are any other questions that you guys have, and I'm happy to try to answer those. Sure.
Next, with the agenda for the upcoming meetings, there will be a packet of information from Conrad before we meet, or we get it at the day that we're actually sitting.
I'm not going to answer that. I'll tell you how things work for us, but I'll let Conrad answer that one.
So we should have your email, Tom. I send out the board packets about 2 weeks in advance. So if you haven't got an email from me, let's touch base after the meeting and we can make sure we have your proper contact.
No, I did.
Yeah.
We're talking about some of the additional rezoning and things like that.
Oh, okay.
We're going to get that.
Oh, yes. Yes. I'm sorry. Correct. So we have our own deadlines that we have to, make sure we get the package. So by the time when it goes out for publication, you'll have an agenda packet for each item. Mm-hmm. Correct. Yeah. I'm sorry. I misunderstood. Yeah.
I will tell you that has not historically been the case, but it has always been the case with Conrad. For sure.
Except those text amendments, because the consultant's too slow. Notwithstanding present company. So any other questions? And one thing I'll plant a seed for you. If there's other things that you would like to hear about, learn about, or you'd like me to cover at some future time, if you want to mention that now or mention it to Conrad later, do that. And we're happy to kind of, change the curriculum around in whatever way suits you.
2 quick ones. We have somebody absent. There's 8 people here. There's a vote and there's a tie. What happens?
So that would be where you drag out your rules of procedure. Generally speaking, so you've got a body of, I think there's 9, right? And I think, do you have an alternate or not? So that's a great question. And unfortunately, I don't know your rules of procedure, so I don't know how you guys handle this. It's different everywhere.
And we can save it for later if you want to come back with an answer. That I was just curious about
I don't
that.
recall it ever happening.
I've had
It
that.
won't next week.
Yeah, I can look in that a little bit more. I know that's happened in Burlington where there was just people, quorum at that time was a 4-4 or 4, maybe there were 4 members. And I want to say there was just a tie vote. What happens is, I gotta make sure I'm remembering this correctly. When there's a motion placed before the board, that motion, I want to say,
I think the motion either passes or fails.
correct. Yeah.
And if you don't have a majority in the affirmative, then it fails.
That's correct.
Okay.
And I want to say in that case, I don't remember what we did on it. I thought I remembered, but I don't remember. But we'll look it up and get you an answer. That's why we do have alternates. So if there's an alternate that's available, it's really important, thank you, the alternates, and also to let us know in advance if someone can't be in attendance. So that way we can avoid having that kind of possibility of
Conrad,
not having a quorum.
I know at the last meeting we had an attorney present. Or do we expect that to continue?
Yeah, so we will be having town council or legal will be, I think we're looking to having them present at all of our future 4th planning board meetings. She didn't come tonight, Emily Colley, because
I think we wore her out.
she was at our planning board, our Board of Adjustment meeting. I told her she doesn't have to come tonight. So we're recording. So Emily, hello. You can watch this later, and staff can also watch. But yeah, we're planning to have legal counsel with us. Mm-hmm.
And then my last one, I promise. I know so the UDO is fairly new. I know you've had some people come before you in the last couple months that applied under the old plan. Are there many of those in the pipeline still to be heard here, or is that pretty much through the process now?
What That's a great question. So we have some projects that I want to say might come back as substantial deviations to approved plans that were part of old code. In Burlington, when I was with Chad, that legacy continued for probably another 2 or 3 years. I'm not seeing that necessarily too much. Right now down the pipe, I don't have any projects that come to mind, but we have conversations with folks. So modifying an approved plan under the prior, what was called the UDC, there's substantial deviations and minor deviations. So we talk with folks to let them know, okay, if you want to change this, the number of your unit count, you got to go back to town council. And so I think the applicants are modifying their plans so that they can stay within the parameters of what would be a minor modification to not have to go through a public hearing process.
So the state law has what's called vesting. There's this body of law that protects applications that have been approved but not completed before the rules change. And the vesting, the body of law that deals with vesting protects those already approved but not yet complete applications from changes in the law. And those vesting terms vary. They go as far as 7 years for what we call a multi-phase development plan. So it's conceivable that you saw that a plan was approved 5 years ago, 6 years ago, that could still come forward under the prior UDC, though with every passing year, the likelihood of that diminishes. It's a good question. Yes, good questions. They're hard to answer. Other questions? Things you'd like me to cover next time, other than being faster? Okay, think about it. We'll come back when you guys have a light night, and maybe we'll do some hypotheticals and talk a little bit more about some of the stuff that we didn't get to cover tonight. And I sure do appreciate y'all's time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chad. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, item 6 on the agenda, informal discussion, public comment. It does not appear that there's anyone from the public to comment tonight, so I will go past that and look for a motion to adjourn, unless you have something, Conrad.
Correct. Just one more thing. For the election of a chair and a vice chair, we are anticipating that to occur at your March meeting. So consider if you're wanting to step up to the role of a chair or to be a vice chair. Thank you, Chair Dupree, for stepping in for the time being, but we'll do that election in March. Staff right now, y'all are jumping into the deep water, the deep pond, the deep side of the pool, if you will. Trying to get that analogy right. The comprehensive transportation plan is going to be coming your way soon. Scheduled either February or March is meeting. That's our expected date. This is hopefully it's a very user-friendly document, about 80 to 90 pages, but it really does set the town's future transportation growth going forward. So I'm really excited to bring this forward to you. We'll get that confirmed here very soon. I expect it to have that coming your way very soon. And I think what we'll do is your next meeting is, oh goodness, I just left my head. So let's see.
Just make sure to give it to Saraski like now, so he has enough time to tear it to pieces.
Yeah.
I'll just take it.
Yeah, that's right, Mike.
So
Thank you.
done.
It was only 40 pages till he got involved.
Yeah, Mike, board member Saraski was part of the project and had some really good, insightful comments. We've been working very closely with the consultant team, and I'm really looking forward to bringing a nice product before the board for your all's recommendation to council. And your next board meeting will be February 24th of 2025, unless otherwise noted that it will be canceled, and I'll let you guys know ahead. But thank you. No more comments.
All right, that's it for this evening. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion to adjourn.
Have a motion from board member Applewhite. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second from board member Gleason. All in favor? Aye. Thank you all.